It is Friday, March 1st. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another 2-disc episode of LTPS. It's been not a great week in the world of PlayStation, as I'm sure a lot of you probably saw from this past Tuesday. And now we've got more bad news to go along with that, but that and other news items as well. So, as always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. This is your last call to claim the February PS Plus Essential lineup before it goes away. March 5th, it's going to change over to Destiny 2, The Witch Queen, F123, Hello Neighbor 2, and Sifu, all on PS4 and PS5, both native versions, which this is a solid month. It's always better when we have at least more than 3 games, but that and Sifu is a fantastic roguelike beat-em-up, something where the game's had a lot of post-launch support as well, so if you were initially turned off by the early reviews of it saying how it was very difficult, then you'll be happy to know that they addressed that pretty early on to where there's a more easier setting you can play on. That was the one I needed to actually get through that game. It was that tough even for me. Not to say I'm like amazing at games or anything, but yeah, it's so fun, really rewarding combat, something that is worth playing. Hello Neighbor 2, also fun and quirky, but between that, Destiny 2 is very self-explanatory. F1's kind of a write-off here. You're either into that kind of game or you're not. But I would say it's a solid month all around. Now, moving on to our first story, PlayStation 3 got a brand new firmware update, version 4.91. Yes, PS3 still getting new firmware updates in 2024. Sound the alarm bells. Although in the grand scheme of things, not really a big deal because this is simply another annual update for updating Blu-ray keys and also addressing any sort of security loopholes if there are any that the company's still actively working on. But otherwise, it's something where, yeah, they tend to do this every year, which is always a good thing to simply keep PS3 a reliable and up-to-date Blu-ray player, so that's always nice. But otherwise, yeah, there's really nothing here. If you're on OFW for your consoles, then you'll obviously need this to continue signing into PSN, downloading games, playing online, but if you're on CFW or HEN, then you want to not download this and install it and wait for the homebrew community to catch up and make sure they've got a 4.91 compatible release to put out. Otherwise, yeah, you're going to have to wait a little bit. So yeah, PlayStation 3, always fun to at least have an excuse to talk about it, and for a new firmware, we've got 4.91. Now, moving on to our next news story, it's not all bad news this week, because obviously yesterday a very big high-profile game came out for PS5, known as Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which, as we often say with very big high-profile games, if you are playing it right now, if you're going to pick it up later today, if you're taking time off for work to play it, whatever the case is, I sincerely hope you have a fun time with it, enjoy it, have fun, something where people have been waiting a long time for this game, and so the only thing here to mention is that, well, just be mindful of spoilers. They have been circulating online for a bit now, and this game is not a true one-for-one remake in the sense that they're, they are willing to change certain things. There are surprising elements that are meant to occur, so just be, careful of that. But the other quick news item we can mention about this game is that there was a manufacturing defect with all Asian physical prints of this game where the data and play discs are swapped. Now, how this happened, I don't know. It might be something where they printed the wrong content on the disc, or the actual image being printed was put on the wrong one. But if you try to play the play disc, that won't work. The data disc is the play disc, and then you insert the play disc first to install the content. Only for, again, Asia physical versions, so if you have NTSC, PAL, obviously it's fine. You're probably already playing those discs if you bought them. But I thought that was funny because we don't have very many 2-disc PS5 games, and now we've got millions of copies out there for these territories that have this defect, which is kind of silly. Square did say the problem was with SIE, so I guess it falls on them, but yeah, just funny to see that happen. I mean, I'm sure for those that maybe don't know about this, or they at least don't have the foresight to go, oh, why isn't this working? Let me try the other one. Then I'm sure Sony and Square will be flooded with a bunch of unnecessary customer support that they otherwise would not have had to deal with if they were able to maybe do this properly. But I thought that was a quirky little thing to happen. In other Final Fantasy news, Square confirmed they will be at PAX East on March 22nd hosting a panel, which will have the series producer Naoki Yoshida and also the DLC director Takeo Kujiuraoka and location director Michael Christopher Koji Fox, where they will discuss the Rising Tide, which is the more substantial DLC for Final Fantasy XVI. So we should be getting more info about the content. Maybe they'll debut a trailer, and that is something where it's meant to be the larger content with, actual new narrative story beats, and it's going to be at least more than 3-4 hours for what was the first content they put out. That was more gameplay focused, not bad obviously, but something where this will be the bigger one that we're looking forward to. So March 22nd, we should find out more info about what's going on with this content. Next up, it looks like Helldivers 2 has finally caught up with player demand, finally. So we did see last week, right after upload for LTPS, the last minute update that came in there was that they increased the server cap to 700,000. Now it's still like 700, 800,000, but the players have kind of leveled off to about a solid 200,000. And it's something where they've finally caught up, essentially. That's the news here. Arrowhead CEO saying they can now focus on improvements and also resuming their original plan, which the phrasing there is so, sort of obvious as to, again, what they were not expecting, which was just this many players jumping in right on day one, and then the word of mouth really helping the game in a big way, where in a very unusual situation, the week 2 sales of the game at retail were more than what they were before week 1. I mean, almost always, a lot of games, they have that big debut, and then it's kind of a week after week decline to where it either levels off or it's completely off the sales charts, but this saw like a 40% jump, which is unusual. So again, word of mouth really helped this game in a big way, but just got to a point where Arrowhead was not at all expecting this, that and Sony, which it seems like now they're finally caught up, and now they can start working on, again, their original plan of doing standard updates for improving the game, and of course having a content roadmap, like for example, as we saw not too long ago, that they are planning on possibly adding mechs in the game, and now that footage has already been out there. So mechs are coming as well, which is probably a very fun, unique modifier to what is already very hectic gameplay that is also extremely difficult. Moving on to Rise of the Ronin, the PS5 exclusive from Team Ninja, where we got more details on this game over on the PS blog, and as part of a 9-10 minute trailer that was an extended look at a bunch of new gameplay mechanics and sort of design principles that they went with going into this game. So this was a conversation with the game producer and director Fumihiko Yasuda, the animation lead Kosuke Wakamatsu, and the combat design director Takio Fujisaki. So they were going over the importance of being historically accurate, which it seems like they spent a lot of time looking at the firearms and the swords and what they would use and what their preferences were, and also having a bit of an internal debate about how realistic should they be, which seems like they were kind of at a agree to disagree thing with some of these flying mechanics, while at the same time having this on-ground combat. But they were also talking about how are they balancing the ranged gun combat with the close combat sword play. Then we also got a glimpse at the menu UI, showing off all these different combat styles you can choose. Then there's also the bond system, where you can apparently befriend or become enemies with historical figures, which that will have consequences or benefits when you're actually in the moment-to-moment gameplay. So a lot of very interesting ideas that we're seeing play out, and again, the really big question simply is, as we approach the release of this game, is it going to feel very samey to everything they've done so far in the gameplay department, or will it feel a bit more different and kind of have its own identity outside of what they've shipped thus far? But it does sound all very appealing. Everything they are putting out there so far, creating a dialogue, explaining more about the game and what they're trying to do and accomplish, which they're doing this because we are getting so close to the game coming out. Like, it doesn't feel like it, but at least they are finally putting a lot of this stuff out there, and it all sounds, again, compelling. Just gameplay-wise, I want to see how different this will or will not feel to something like Neo or Wolong. That's at least what I'm thinking. But otherwise, yeah, we'll probably get more details to discuss going into next week as well. Now, of course, the bad news from this past week is the announcement of mass layoffs at SIE, where they confirmed this on Tuesday, which we then did a separate upload discussing the breaking news right away. But as a brief recap, it is a matter of SIE confirming a reduction in their total workforce by about 8%, or 900 people, and this would be across Insomniac Games, Naughty Dog, Guerrilla Games, Firesprite, various disciplines and roles across SIE globally. London studio is getting shut down as well. Twisted Metal at Firesprite is reportedly canceled, and it's just been really tough to see unfold as Insomniac puts out a statement acknowledging the layoffs, which has probably been tough for them, especially under the context of, again, the Insomniac breach, where we saw some emails from Ted Price where back in November they were talking about this, and Ted Price was being very protective of those employees and those long-standing Insomniacs, and just seeing little anecdotes left and right being posted on Twitter or LinkedIn from now former employees about, you know, something that was obviously out of their control. But it's just, you know, it's been a terrible thing to see unfold. And the one thing we forgot to mention on Tuesday, which this was something that came up prior, it was a matter of Jim Ryan had done a site visit to London studio 5 days before the layoffs. Now, what the context was behind that, we have no idea. I guess it was just a standard site visit saying goodbye to Jim Ryan or whatever. Maybe he was outlining something to the studio leadership, although sometimes, or more often than not, nobody really knows until the announcement is actually made, and there's just different regulations based on where you're actually doing this, right? So in the UK, it's a little bit different, but it's just, that was ridiculous, obviously, to see unfold. But the amazing thing is, like, it didn't stop there. Only a day later, we saw EA announce 670 layoffs, canceling the rumored first-person Mandalorian game at Respawn, and then Supermassive Games also announced 90 layoffs for 150 positions that are at risk of the 300-person studio. And then Deck 9 also announced a 20% reduction of staff on Wednesday. We're just seeing the games industry really correct itself in a way that we had caught wind of earlier, right, from that games industry article not too long ago, where they were speaking with a few CEOs at some game companies and publishers and some venture capitalists, and how we were hearing that this is going to be a very tough year. And my gosh, it certainly is. It's only been 2 months into 2024, and we're seeing this. It is just really disappointing to see, but it does sound like a sort of correction, right? Especially when, you know, at least as far as SIE goes, it's a matter of them having very thin margins. It's not like they're not making a ton of money, but the actual profits just aren't there when you consider how much more they're risking to make so little. At a certain point, you would be better off investing in the S&P 500 or putting it into a savings account, which Sony is not in the business of doing. They're a publicly traded company, right? So they're in the entertainment business. So for them, like, a very quick, dirty way to increase margins, like many other companies, is doing layoffs, right? So that would be a great way to, in the short term, appease shareholders and try and come up with some better numbers, which I think their stock still hasn't really recovered from that recent financial report. But either way, it's just, you know, and now that we've had a few days to sit on this, right, and looking at the studio closure, London studio, which I still think is incredibly disappointing, even though I think for a lot of PlayStation fans, it's tough to maybe have some appreciation or reverence for them when historically they've done a lot of Move games, SingStar, PlayStation Eye games in recent years, PlayStation VR, which not a lot of people had the chance to really try or engage with, but just due to the sort of history of that studio, I always think back to like Psygnosis and Team Soho and things like that, and to know that we were going to get another standard 2D game out of them, which would have been a long time since we had that, even though it was going to be a live service game, that was still an exciting prospect to me. But, you know, really looking at this and what we're hearing from Ethan Gatch of Kotaku and his recent Substack post on, it's called Dead Game, he was, at least spoke with some people from these studios and had learned that it was between Media Molecule and London Studio for a possible studio closure, which Media Molecule obviously would also make sense. I think we all kind of know why that would be the case, right? With them doing Dreams for a long time and that not really going anywhere or finding a huge audience, although there's also the issue of Sony never really, I find, investing the necessary resources to allow that idea to flourish and letting people publish content outside of Dreams, but I digress. It was between Media Molecule and London Studio, and with London Studio in particular, it was, from what we're hearing, it sounds like they were not pressured to meet these milestones or any sort of deadlines that Sony was giving them. It was simply a consequence of it probably would have taken a very long time for them to ship that project. So, you know, as far as like labor goes, labor costs, right? That's the number one thing for making games nowadays, and it always has been. It's labor, but you know, they haven't shipped something since 2019, and it's going to be another 5, 6, 7 years for what is going to be a brand new, unpredictable IP in a very unpredictable environment, that being live service. So it's like, I hate that that's the consequence, but it was probably that was probably the correct path if a studio had to go. But it's like, that's the worst part about it, because the games industry is still in a good spot as far as the consumer-facing side goes. Like, there's still plenty of spending going on. People are buying, playing games, enjoying them. There's too many games coming out. There's actually a lot of saturation going on. But it's not like that stuff is bad. It's the back end, right? It's all these studios investing so much, dealing with the labor costs, and it being such a, a saturated environment. There really is like a correction going on behind the scenes, a lot of it unfolding right before our eyes, and it seems like there's more unfolding that does need to happen. And the worst part about it is that the very hardworking, creative people that make all these gorgeous, beautiful looking games, engaging titles that we love so dearly, they're the ones that are paying the consequences. It's like, thank you for making all this wonderful stuff, and now you can go. And I hate that. I really do. Now, the one thing we can mention amidst all this layoff news is that over on the Gaming Leaks and Rumors subreddit, there was a thread about how Jason Schreier was confirming to fans on X about how the Horizon multiplayer game is not canceled, and also the Firesprite new horror IP is not canceled as well, which the news here is that Jason responded on the Reddit post itself using his verified account, simply clarifying that for Firesprite, he did not say it was a new IP. And that's all he says. So, because for a while, I think that was kind of a safe assumption, is that they were probably doing a new IP, although I guess that means it's not a new IP. And with Firesprite, the sort of obvious suspect would be, okay, well, they did The Persistence, so maybe they're doing a sequel to that, considering Sony now owns them, so that IP would be in-house. Or it could be, say, Siren, maybe Until Dawn 2, which would be interesting given that we have Ballistic Moon doing the sequel, or the remake. So initially it was like, oh, so maybe they're going to do the remake and then springboard that into the sequel. But that's kind of what we recently found out about. But this kind of goes into our next story, which is about possibly some unrest going on within Firesprite, which deals with their post-acquisition life within Sony, where this was a report being put out by Ed Nightingale over at Eurogamer. And so, for one, they do corroborate that they are working on what they quote as a high-profile game in a Sony franchise. So that would imply high-profile. I would not say that's The Persistence. Siren is kind of, I think, a bit more obscure nowadays, so maybe Until Dawn would be more high profile, so we can sort of leave that there. But really the more concerning thing is the discovery that the studio culture and leadership seems to be in a bad place right now. So sources claim that there were 2 senior leaders from XDev that came in that have been accused of sexual discrimination and ageism, which led to an internal investigation by Sony that resulted in the claims being dismissed due to a misunderstanding. And this was bad enough to where the victims explored legal options, but apparently they were given a financial payout from Sony. There's also been public reviews of the studio on Glassdoor citing a toxic bullying culture. The company culture and the management changed for the worst after the Sony acquisition. Most of the founders have left the company, with Graham Ankers, the managing director, leaving the company as well back in May 2023, which at the time was being described as a really surprising thing because they were poised to be in it for the long haul. The development of Horizon Call the Mountain was also apparently an issue, where it was difficult dealing with Guerrilla being protective of their IP, onboarding new people to try and finish the game on time, and naturally people trying to crunch when employees were even told they didn't have to, which some employees were also, speaking with Eurogamer, say that there were some positives to the environment change, that the professionalism from the new leads and directors was top-notch, or that there was a strong sense and push for inclusivity and being valued, but one source did describe it as being a lot more nuanced. Others have said the culture and positivity they once had has not been upheld by Sony, and that really big creative decisions were being dumped on teams in this unsympathetic manner with a, quote, just do your job attitude. So, really disappointing report to go over, assuming a lot of it does end up being true. And more so for Firesprite, because when that acquisition happened, it kind of felt very full circle, as in, well, at the time, I think a lot of people looked at Firesprite and went, why them? Where's the relationship? They're kind of a new studio, like that seems out of left field, but not really, because foundationally, this studio is comprised of former Sony Liverpool staff, which that was a studio Sony owned. Now, yes, they did close them, but it was simply a matter of, like, we see they went off and did their own thing, founded their own studio, and that was, off the back of their established relationships at Sony to then work on their IP to get funding and keep that studio afloat in their early days, because they then worked on the Playroom for PS4 in 2013, went on to continue working with Sony here and there. And so you would almost imagine that based on where they came from and how they continued working with Sony, that there would be a studio culture that would be fostered in a similar manner. Not to say that's, you know, a reflection of the founders at the time, right? It seems like people were happy pre-acquisition, and the problem was post-acquisition, to where these two ex-dev people, I guess that's obviously terrible to hear based on a number of complaints being levied towards them, but more so, you know, having those years go by from the acquisition, and once all those golden parachute checks went out, the employee retention bonuses, once they're there and they've done their time at the company, it's like, okay, now we can finally leave because we know where this thing is headed, and which, you know, nowadays we can see the end consequence is that the Twisted Metal project was not going anywhere, and even that was something where that was taken off of Lucid. But I don't think that's a reflection of, say, what was going on, acquisition or not, or, I mean, because it's always something where games are just tough to make. Clearly it was tough at Lucid, it was tough here, but either way, it seems like management is seemingly a problem at the studio, where they felt a certain way about their environment, and now it feels a lot different. Some seem to be okay with it, and a lot of others not. So this is just as a terrible one to read about as well. So I guess we'll keep you know, our eyes on Firesprite, see how they're doing and where they go from here. If anything, the only thing we can add is that what we found out about is that possibly they are working on an established PlayStation franchise now, and it's not going to be some sort of new horror IP, which I guess it would be a bit, I don't know if strange is the right word here, but to see them do maybe Until Dawn 2 and Ballistic Moon, which was former Supermassive staff, they're simply handling the remake. I don't know, it's an interesting direction, but broadly speaking about sort of the negativity surrounding the games business right now, it does seem like this recent reevaluation process is Sony possibly being less, or being more risk averse, I guess is the way we should say it, right? It's a very risky venture to invest all this money into a lot of live service stuff, right? So maybe they're just trying to really cut down on the stuff that they, but before investing a boatload of cash into shipping these things and requiring all this staff to maintain it, it should be something where let's cut down to maybe 5 or 6 games that we feel a lot more strongly about, which, if anything, we can also say we should keep our eyes more focused on something like Concord or Fair Games, where they might have gotten a lot of flack for their lackluster reveals, but seemingly there's something there that Sony thinks is worth proceeding with. That, and also the Horizon Online project as well. Moving on to a somewhat similar news story where, as far as gaming industry burnout goes, Naughty Dog's Neil Druckmann was speaking with Logic. Logic, the rapper, singer, songwriter, producer. He's a big fan of the games, and he's actually in part 2. But he's got this podcast called Logically Speaking, love that name, where he was talking with Neil Druckmann, and he asked him if he thinks he's going to be doing these games forever, or if he can see himself making games forever. And so Neil says that he does not see himself doing it forever at this scale, that it does take a lot out of you, it's very stressful managing all those people, and that at this stage in his life, his kids are number one. He does think that he would transition to another creative field that's maybe less stressful, but he's at a point where he's asking himself how many more of these does he have left in him, and that it's not that many. And I think that's where a lot of very well-known gaming industry people probably are. We are, well, this is a very young industry when you consider how long it's been around. There are some people that are, you know, they've been around since, as we say, like the PlayStation 1, but even prior to the PS1, right? A lot of people are getting their start at Sega, Atari, you know, doing coin-op games and things like that, kind of working out of their bedrooms, making these little prototype games, and eventually going on to be producers, programmers, and things at these big studios. And eventually somebody like Neil, who had a similar comeuppance. But the industry is so young, and so a lot of the people that were there at the beginning are getting to that point in life where you know, they're pretty much asking themselves these questions. And I always find it fascinating when we've got somebody that is, you know, willing to open up about that, because quite frankly, it's a lot of time, and it is very stressful, especially when these games can take as long as they do, right, to put so much time and energy into just one particular game, and then it's like, oh, let's do it all over again, and over a 10-year period, you've shipped 2 games. You know, that's a lot of time out of your life. So I feel like we're going to see a lot of big names in the next 5 years exit gaming, not because, you know, there's nowhere for them to go, but it's because they're just ready to not do this anymore. We've already seen a lot of pretty well-known departures, and Neil, I think, does, you know, he's probably at a point in his life where maybe in 10 years he will be out the door. Maybe after the next one. We're not entirely sure. His language implies that he might do it for another 10 years or so, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's sooner. Next up, we have a surprising revelation, if not one that's also beneficial, and that is when Pentiment came out on PS5, the game actually runs at 120 frames per second on PS5, which is not the problem. I mean, the game is not exactly resource intensive, so that would make sense, but the issue here is that it runs at 60 on Series X. So obviously this leans right into the notion that, hey, we've got a Microsoft-owned, Obsidian-developed game shipping on a competitor, and all of a sudden it runs better. Like, what's going on there? So what happened was Pentiment's director, Josh Sawyer, already did address this, saying that a patch is coming for Xbox where the 120 FPS mode will be enabled. Right now it's only disabled because of a bug. And so that's what's going on there. Obviously it's a very modest game in terms of the presentation of it. It's not exactly, it doesn't need 120 obviously, but still there's that brief moment where it's like, oh, okay, so we've got a competitor console playing the game better. But that's like not the first time that's happened anyway, right? I forget what it was, either Deathloop or Ghostwire Tokyo or something, but I don't know, I always find these are like minute differences in the grand scheme of things. Like, it's always fascinating to sort of dive into those differences between platforms, but I don't know, I find this generation has been very similar across a number of games, and in good faith, I think if Sony had to ship games on Xbox, or Xbox doing it on PlayStation now, like in good faith, studios will always try and use the hardware the best of their abilities, and things like this are more often just a simple oversight, or in this case, a bug. Moving on to the PlayStation Portal, where we just got some valuable insight into the creation of it, how Sony felt about the expectations, the fan feedback, things like that. And so when speaking with Stephen Totilo of GameFile, PlayStation's VP of Product Management, Hiromi Wakai, has said that they don't have sales data to share, but the demand for the Portal has continued to exceed their expectations. They also confirmed the initial idea surrounding the Portal was figuring out how to expand the PS5 console experience and was never meant to be a separate handheld device. Planning began in 2021 with actual product development in 2022, with a team comprised of staff that had worked on the PS5, the Vita, and the PlayStation mobile app. Wakai also explains they were well aware of the niche use the device would serve, and that the consumer response would be polarizing, but they credit early fans that would talk up the device and explain the use cases to others that were skeptical. And that is exactly how the Portal has played out so far. It very much has been a lot of people saying, this thing sucks, I hate it, it's not what I want, which, okay, fair enough, but it is exactly what it is, a very niche use case device. And again, as far as like the sales stuff goes, I'll continue to say, like, this thing is probably not moving what people are thinking it is. It's got to be something where Sony manufactured maybe 100,000 units, but they can move 200,000 of them. I don't know. I'm not saying those numbers are accurate, but it's just to illustrate the idea that the final number can be not massive and they can still underestimate it, right? So that's kind of where this thing is more than likely falling. I'm more than certain the attach rate for this thing is not going to be very high compared to the entire PlayStation 5 install base, which it would need in order for a Portal to make sense. And I get that people still want a dedicated handheld. That's fine. That's not even close to what this thing ever was going to be, obviously. But yeah, it seems like it's coming in and out of stock more often, so it seems like they're finally catching up with demand. And it is a very useful device if you can get some mileage out of it, so I'm trying to spend more time with it. And yeah, it does seem like the availability is starting to lighten up a bit. Now, we just had to talk about this very cool recent discovery, which is LittleBigPlanet Hub has resurfaced after all these years. So LBP Hub, for those that don't know, and I'm more than certain a lot of you either have never heard of this or you completely forgot, but this was announced officially back in August 2013. It was meant to be a free-to-play LittleBigPlanet package on PSN, where you would download this. You have access to the first world of levels in LBP 1, 2, and also it would have an exclusive level. But from there, it's basically an introduction to LBP. You would have full access to the creation suite, and you would be able to buy more levels and obviously costumes and things like that from there. So that's what LBP Hub was, and it never came out. It never actually got a formal cancellation either, so it was just something where after enough time had passed, we knew it wasn't coming, and many ideas and themes went into LBP 3 at a certain point. So yeah, this popped up recently thanks to the Russian LBP community. It was an internal beta build that somebody was finally able to publish online after a 10-year NDA expired, and so yeah, they were able to dump this online, so it is something where you can go check it out, play it, and it's cool to see this preserved, and something where I wish this happened more often. There are many 10-year plus things that we know are past the NDA period, but they're kind of lost to history, or at least we hope that someday they'll come back. But it was really cool seeing LBP Hub come back. That was not something I was expecting to see this past week. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday video was the breaking news about the SIE layoffs, so that did take priority, which means our Tuesday video that was planned is going into next week, which also means I might be able to work in another. Not sure if that would be Monday, Tuesday, or Tuesday, Wednesday. It might not happen at all. It depends on my end, but that's kind of where we're at right now, but otherwise, that is it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.